Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of the Percussion Revolver series. I was recently asked and talked quite a bit with several people on one of the forums talking about what size bullet, projectile, etc. Why are the cap and balls called 44s or 36s and today it's a 38 or a 45? Well, it goes back to how all of this came about, but in a nutshell, I want you to understand this, that today we, because of modern times, we say that this is a 45, like a 45 long Colt, 45 ACP, and then it goes into the gun. The size of the bullet coming out is irrelevant to what went into it. In that day, it was the size of the bullet coming out rather than what went in, because you're starting with a larger ball and necking it down. Let me explain that. Let's just go and start with 45. So a cap and ball, we call it a 44, right? But you start out with a 4.51, 4.54, 4.57 round ball. That is then put in there and loaded into the cylinder. When you do, it shaves a little bit off and makes it a little bit smaller. So this becomes a 4.49. Okay. Then whenever it fires, it comes out of the cylinder, it goes into the forcing cone, which squeezes it down even farther, and then it exits the barrel. And when it exits the barrel, it should be like a 4.47. That's where they got 44 from. We say 45 because that's the ammunition we're loading in the back of the gun. In that day, they said 44 because that was the size of what came out of the gun, the end product. True of 36s as well. So let's now understand kind of what's going on here and how things changed and why our modern replicas and the original guns are different, and how our modern replicas are actually better in many ways. Okay? Now let's start out with this. Let's say in 44. Why do we say today 4.51, 4.54, or 4.57? In fact, let me make that a little more obvious. In the 44 cap and ball, it's usually going to be either 4.51, 4.54, 4.57. Okay. The vast majority of the guns are going to be that. Now in the 36s, you have a 3.75, 3.80, and then there is a 3.90. We're going to get to that in a second. That's the 36s. Where the 44s got this was when they went to making the replicas. Okay, the original guns were, the ball was 450, 451, or 454, depending on who the manufacturer was. A lot of times it was how big and aggressive the reamer was that was going to cut the rifling. And so the diameter in the cylinder was how much it was going to shave off. Thus, if I put too big into a tighter fit, it was hard to load because you got to shear off more on the sides. We'll get to that in a minute, how that can be an advantage and actually and a detriment. But so if people ask me, Blackie, what mold should I buy if I'm starting out with a current production or something that's been in recent production, like the last 20 years, cap and ball revolver? It's a 44 caliber. What size mold or ammo should I start with? I always say start with 4.51. See what your accuracy is. Then if you can find somebody or can get some 4.54, just buy a box of them, warranty or whatever, and try them out. Does accuracy improve? Yes or no? If it doesn't improve, stick with 4.51. If it does improve, you may want to go with 4.54. We will be covering that in a minute. as to why it can make the difference. But you got 4.57 out there, Blackie. Yes, 4.57 is almost exclusively for a Ruger Old Army. Why? When Ruger wanted to bring the Ruger Old Army to market, it's obvious to anybody that's looking at it, he started with a Ruger Blackhawk N45 Colt. Well, the size of the bullet back in the 1950s for 45 Colt was 4.54. Now in the 70s they kind of standardized it to today. When you go buy 45 Colt ammunition and 45 Colt guns, they're going to be in 4.51. So they kind of standardized to 45 ACP, 45 Colt are the same 4.51 diameter. But back in the historic time period, it was a 4.54 diameter bullet. And so it was a little bit bigger. So when Ruger went to making it in the 60s, it was using what was standard at that day, which was 4.54. And so he wanted a little bit bigger to fit the bore. Because remember, I'm using the standard barrel that's for 45 Colt. I'm putting a percussion cylinder and loading system behind it. So if I started with a 4.51, it's just going to roll down the barrel. So he came up with 4.57. That way when they necked it, it would be 4.54 and would go down the bore correctly. That's where that comes from. So unless you've got a Ruger Old Army or a very wore out, very old percussion gun, I wouldn't even consider looking at the 4.57 because it's usually just for the Ruger Old Army. Now, if, like I said, you do have something that was made in the 60s or the 70s, and man, that thing has shot and shot, and accuracy is gone, you may be able to put a 4.57 in it and get it to grip what little rifling is left in the gun. And again, in a minute, we're going to discuss how the different sizes swedge is different to give more grip to the rifling. So, I have had in my past, I've had a 4.57 mold, because I was shooting really cheap, really wore out, a lot of times brass frames that were the $49 cheapies they imported from noisemakers for the Civil War guys. And the rifling was just garbage in them. Man, it was so soft that in like 1,000 rounds, you didn't wear the rifling at them where you look down the barrel and it's just little hints at rifling. It's almost a smooth bore. And so I would go to 4.57 and make it grip what little was there. And so that would be the only time I would recommend 4.57. So start out with 4.51 and then buy a box of 4.54. If you're someone that's going to shoot a lot of cannonball over a long period of time, go ahead and get a mold of each. And what I do is I take mine and I write on the handle, the wooden handle, 45, 4.54 Colt 40 cap and ball, or whatever, to give me a dead giveaway of what it is. So when I'm picking up and holding the mold, I know what it is. Yes, there's numbers on them, but the different manufacturers, sometimes it's just a number and it has no reference to anything. It's just a part number. And unless you memorize it, so I just write them on the handles so I can pull it out and see. Okay? Now let's shift to the 36. The 36, same idea. 375 or 380. Usually 375 is going to handle what you want, because it's which pretty much is the standard of the industry right now. If your gun's got quite a bit of wear, or like again you got one of the old ones, you may want to look at 380 because again it's a little bit bigger and it'll grip the rifling a little bit better. Okay. 390. The only 390 that I know of is the Arrows Gone bullet mold Richmond bullet. Conical is 390. And I really respect Markov's and Arrows Gone bullet molds for what they've done for historic accuracy, etc. But I'm just going to throw this out there, guys, and be straight up honest with you. I think the Confederacy made a mistake. Because if that bullet was a 380, it would load a lot better and function. For those of you that have not seen it, it's kind of like a Hershey's Kiss shape with a shank on it. Okay, it was developed by the Confederacy. It's called the Richmond bullet. and the ones they got were that he got as an original, and he's replicating it. It was 390. That don't work, and we're going to deal with that in a minute. I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. But to my knowledge, the only 390 is the Richmond bullet, and it is extremely hard to load, and the end result is not that good. Accuracy is good, but let me deal with that. Okay. So now that we've kind of touched on the basis of it, let me talk about what I've been alluding to of when you swodge it in, what happens. Okay, you start out with a round ball or conical or whatever, and you have inside of a chamber like this being the chamber in here. When you take the loading lever and you go to squeeze it, that ball stops being round and kind of looks kind of like a tangerine because the top pushes down on it. Kind of flattens top, and lead wants to flow outward. Think of it like squeezing a marshmallow. As I push it down, these edges right here shear off the sides and produce that ring. And what we end up in here is actually the round ball, and then 360 all the way around, you have a narrow little band right there. That's where this ring was sheared off, okay? And so if I use a 375 and it fits properly and I do it, it is, let's say, a 1/1000th ring. That's how thick it is. If I do a 454 and I ram it, then that ring will be like a 2 or 3 thousandths. And this band is wider. Okay? Now, since we're talking about a curve of a round thing inside of a cylinder, it's only the edge that's actually coming into contact. A better representation would probably be like this. So that there's a gap right in these areas. Because you're only on that band is really what's sticking 360, because the curve of the ball. Upon firing, and it comes out and it hits the forcing cone, that band is what engages into the rifling. So that's the reason I said it can improve accuracy. So if my chamber diameter, how big the opening is in the end of that chamber, compared to the opening in my barrel, ideally, yeah, remember all these parts are made separately and then put together. Murphy's Law. Like I said, with a 44, it would be a 451 bullet. When I rammed it, it's now 449. When it makes the jump, it lines into a barrel that's slightly smaller, and it's 447. And so each step down, the ball is a little bit bigger than what it's being forced into, and it has to adapt to it. What happens when it's the other way, and you've got a cylinder that's a little tight and a barrel that's a little bigger? So I ram a 451, and it makes a 449 ball, and the hole in the barrel is 451. Well, it just slides down the barrel. It doesn't really engage that with. It kind of rattles up and down in place. Even though the pressure will arbitrate and make it stick, it doesn't stick well. So this driving band is kind of narrow. Okay? And if you would capture a bullet where you shot it into water or something, or into wet newspaper or something, where you could look and see that ring going all the way around the bullet, where you've cut the rifling is, you can tell how well the rifling is engaging it. See? And so, in that case, a 454 would make a bigger band and give me a little bit more grip on the rifling. Again, if it's a wore-out gun and I'm shooting, my accuracy just sucks, I may try the 457 in it, because that would give me the biggest driving band on that ball, and therefore grip the rifling the best. Give me the most meat out there to actually lock into the rifling. Okay? That's the reason if you shoot a lot of different guns over a long time, you probably end up with all of these molds. Okay? But that's where that comes from. Same thing with the 36. 99 times out of 100, especially if the gun's in good repair and relatively good shape, 375 is going to do just perfectly fine. But eventually, you'll want to get you a 380 mold to do it. Now, I have my Spiller and Burr. My Spiller and Burr shoots 375. Anything else is just held loaded. It's got a really tight chamber, and it shoots it accurately. But the bore and everything is slightly undersized on mine. Okay. On the other end of that, I've got my Rogers and Spencer, that big dragoon, talking about, and it prefers 454. 451 is actually a little bit small for it, and it doesn't produce as good an accuracy as it does with a slightly bigger ball because of chamber dimensions. That gun was made in the 70s, see, so the dimensions and tolerances are a little bit off here. And so I put the bigger ball into it and get better accuracy. I tried a 457 and it didn't give me anything better than a 454. It's just harder to load. Okay. Now talking about that 390, I can't load that 390 into my Spiller and Burr or most of my cap and balls, because here's what's going to happen. And again, I'm not trying to say anything bad about Mark at all. It's historically accurate. I understand that. But the Richmond looks something like this. Kind of like a ace of spades. Now, that's an exaggeration, but you get my idea. This is what the bullet looks like when it comes out of the mold. When I ram that thing down into the chamber, what you end up with, because the rammer's going to push this down because it is so hard to load, you got to bear down or put a cheater bar on that thing to get it to go in. It's going to mash the top down, and then it forces it in there and cuts a huge ring of lead off doing it. Well, what you end up with is this. That's what you end up with. Just a round slug. Any of that teardrop shape is gone. And I did this, I tapped one in. I started one in the forcing cone and I tapped it through with a dowel and brought it out the other side. And it's just a straight, it looks like that, of lead. It engages the rifling of my 61 Navy Stormborn and loves it. Stormborn shoots it very accurately. It's a bare loaded, but it shoots it very accurately because what I'm doing is using the cylinder to cut it from a 390 down to a 375. So I'm shearing 15 thousandths off of that lead. It's reading it says use dead soft lead. The Confederacy was using wore out guns. So I honestly believe that that Richmond bullet, which again, no jab against Mark. Mark is exactly historically accurate. But I think what the Confederacy was trying to do was try to find a remedy for wore out guns that had little or no rifling left. And so they went up in ball size to make it engage what little rifling it had. See, whereas our modern replica, I would love to see Mark bring that out in a non-historically accurate 380. If he did that, I would immediately buy that thing because I think it would work so well. But again, my Stormborn loves it, but it's a bare load, that sucker. But if I'm going hunting with it, yeah, because it's just a flat end slug that just slams. I mean, I've already shot a couple of things with it, and it's impressive how much hit. The impact, even though it's a cabin ball, it looks like a 387 hit it because it's that flat end of that slug just smacking it. You know, it's basically a wad cutter at that point. We'll get to other Conicals in just a minute. But, so because this loading and me shearing off so much, you got this huge, thick, 15 thousandths inch ring that comes off of that sucker. It looks like a washer off a car. you know, and it's just a pain to load it. And you're putting a lot of strain on your loading lever. You're going to bend the loading lever eventually, and it's just a lot of wear and tear on a Colt. Because remember, that wedge has got to hold that pressure when you're putting compound hundreds and hundreds of pounds of power trying to force that hunk of lead down in there. And so you're going to batter up wedges. And I had to change wedges on Stormborn relatively quick. Less than 500 rounds, I had to change wedges because of it. Because the new wedge I put in, it's done a lot better. And I've gone over 1,000 rounds out of that gun now. And it's shooting perfectly fine. It hadn't got soft. But it was that. You know, because I was shooting a lot of those Richmond bullets because I like the accuracy. And now I have regated it over to being a hunting round and just shoot 375 or 380 round ball in it. I believe that when I shoot 380 round ball. But most of the time 375 is going to handle what you're doing. Okay? Now, let's step to the next step. Conicals. Why were conicals prevalent in Civil War ammunition for cartridges, etc.? Because military application was plunging fire. And what that means in English is this. You're right here. You're going to shoot, and you've got guy A, guy B, guy C, all lined up about 3 feet from each other. And we're hoping that that bullet is going to go through the first guy and stick in the second. Maybe it'll glance off the first guy, wound the second guy, and stick in the third guy, because these are mass troops, lines of troops, and you're shooting and trying to shoot like a buckshot pattern into a mass of troops. And so the conical penetrates far better. It usually did not produce the accuracy of the round ball. And many guys just simply use round ball during the war and etc. But the ability of that conical was for penetration, especially when you're shooting something like a horse or something like that. The bigger, heavier ball penetrates deeper because it's mass in motion. A conical is always heavier than a round ball. And so that mass takes longer to come to a stop. It goes deeper in, just like a golf ball and a ping pong ball. Which one can you throw the farthest? The ping pong ball's got no mass, so the wind affects it. So you rear back and throw that sucker as hard as you can. You think you're going to throw your shoulder out of the socket, and you're probably going to throw it no more than 10, 15 yards. That golf ball, you can probably pitch it 60, 70, 80 yards easy because it's got mass. And once launched, it takes a while for that mass to slow down and come to a stop. And so that's the idea of a conical and the round ball. The round ball just don't have that mass. So for you, what do I recommend for use in a cap and ball revolver in conicals? Well, what I like is in the 44, I recommend a 4.51, 4.54 mold for round ball, and I recommend a Arizgon bullet mold Kerr bullet for a conical. The Colt bullet was developed back then and it was for penetration, but it is not as good as the Kerr, especially on game. It penetrates in, but it doesn't do hardly any damage because it is such a point. The Colt is. Whereas the Kerr has more of a shoulder and acts more like a Keith bullet, for those of you that know about such things. But acts a lot like a Keith bullet from the time period, and it makes a kind of a flat nose when you ram it, and then when it hits really good, and it penetrates really well, and it penetrates straight, which is great. It doesn't keel off, and that's the problem with Colts. They like to hit and curve once they get into a target. So if you're trying to use it for hunting, it's not as good. So what does Blackie recommend if you got a 44 and you want to get something to shoot? I recommend getting the 4.51 and a Kerr. 4.51 round ball and a Kerr mold, and that should handle 90% of what you're going to do. Okay? Down the line, expand, and go ahead and get you a 4.54. Now also there is the Johnson & Dow. Both of these are made by Gone Bullet Molds. I love the Johnson & Dow, and it was my go-to until I got that Kerr mold, and my accuracy has gone up with it. Now the Johnson & Dow has proven a little more accurate at extreme long range, but I hadn't dialed in that Kerr fully yet. So I would say it's easier to load, fits guns better, and quite often that Johnson & Dow requires you to relieve a little bit to make the clearance, because it's a tall bullet where the Kerr fits in better, and you don't have to modify your guns usually. So for a 44, I recommend the 451 and a Kerr. Johnsons are also good choices if you just think I want to go with that. It wouldn't be a bad choice. Be aware you may need to modify your gun a little bit to make it fit. Okay. In 36, .375 round ball. Eventually get a .380, and under the conical of it, I don't recommend the Richmond, like for one we talked about. In that, I actually like the Colt better, and maybe even the Lee conical on it. One of those works pretty good. Now I've got quite a bit of experience with the Lee conical in 36, and it shoots adequately. But I kind of like, from Gone, the Colt 36 if you're looking for a pointy bullet. I agree what I just said. Never wants to go straight, always wants to curve, but most of the time what I'm going to be hunting with a 36 is going to be small game. So it's a small little bitty body, curves and pops out off the side is fine. I'm not shooting something really, really big with it unless I got, you know. So therefore, I would recommend the Colt bullet for that, or the Lee conical. Okay? Now either one of those works very, very well. Now, I know what some of you are saying right now. Blackie, how about the cartridge conversions? Okay, that's one of the things we need to deal with. In the 44, the reason they convert it to 45 Colt is because 451, 451. Both of them share today. Like I said, modern, the 45 Colt is a 451 bullet. It's a 230 grain, somewhere along in there, to a 255 grain bullet. The rifling in the cap and ball is set up to handle the 200 grain conical at the most. So I would recommend staying in the lighter 45 Colt bullets. What happens is the twist of the rifling is designed for X amount of the bullet. Remember that driving band? To be engaged. If it's too long, the front and the back end's trying to twist. Like imagine having a bath cloth in my hand right now and twisting it in opposite directions. And it affects. Something's got to skid because the bullet's now so long, the front's trying to turn faster than the back end. So the lighter weight bullets, like the 220, the 230 45 Colts, will shoot usually more accurate because the driving band is a little narrower and is staying more in the ballpark as opposed to stretching out long. If those of you that ever read Six Guns by Elmer Keith, and he's talking about shooting a 45 Colt in 1900 on New Year's Eve, and they were sitting on the horses at midnight shooting their guns off because it was New Year's Eve, and the gun blew up, top strap bent forward. And it was because he had took the bullet that was designed for a 45 caliber Sharps, and it was a 300 grain bullet, and put it into a 45 Colt. And that bullet generated way too much pressure, even with black powder, plus the damn front and the back of the bullet are trying to twist, you know, because it's such a long rifle bullet in a pistol. So more than likely, when it started coming out of that forcing cone with a heavily compressed charge behind it, it came out of the cylinder, hit that forcing cone, and kind of stuck, and the top strap just departed and couldn't take the pressure. The cylinder burst. So what we need to understand is in our modern cartridge conversions, the cylinders are modern proof steel to handle the pressure of smokeless ammunition. But the barrel is still a cap and ball. And so if you start going up, it tells you use lead. If you try to use jacketed bullets in it, hey, these are jacketed 45 Colt, man, these are hot self-defense loads. They're going to give you horrible accuracy and wear out your gun quickly, because copper is a whole lot harder than lead and therefore is a whole lot worse on a set of rifling. Now this is the difference between taking a corn cob and rubbing something and taking a horse file and rubbing something. You see what I mean? You don't want to wear out your gun quickly, and so do not use jacketed bullets. Stay with lead, and in the 45 stay more into the correct pressure range. Any of the things that's labeled cowboy will be perfectly fine. It can handle it. But realize if you try to go some of them exotics, so to speak, the rifling is wrong for it. It's going to do more wear and tear and it could damage the gun. So stay with the lead. Okay? The real problem is when we come to 38, which is 36, and its bore is set up to start out with a 375, but 38 Special starts out the world as a 357. That's 23 and 5, 28 reduction. So this is automatically too small for that barrel. Now, they make a lot of the cartridge guns like the open tops that are 38, and the rifling is correct for a 38. But if I'm dropping a cap and ball that started out as a percussion revolver, and I change cylinders and I put a 38 in it, the ball's just going to rattle down the barrel because it's automatically too small. Now I've got to get hollow base. That means the bottom of the bullet is shaped like this, and the bottom of the bullet has a cavity in it, so that when the pressure hits, this flares out and therefore grips the rifling, just like a mini ball in a Civil War musket. So if you're thinking of getting a cap and ball revolver, and I'm wanting to be able to put a drop-in cylinder in it, get a 44. It's far easier because molds, the rounds, everything's available, and I don't have to worry about this barrel conversion. But Blackie, didn't 38 come from the cap and ball 36? Yes. And what had happened was when they made the conversions, most of them right after the war, and people had this perfectly functional gun. Sorry for the bird. They seem to love to hear my voice and love to sing to me. Quit. Anyway, so right after the war, when they converted, they went to a 38 rimfire and then up to the 38 long Colt. They had hollow base bullets to do that, to grip the rifle and the cap and ball. Later, when they went to making bullets, where the bullet didn't sit on top of the brass with like our Conicals, you know, a shaft that goes down inside of the brass and it sits on top like a 22 long rifle, or like a Kerr bullet or a Colt, or all of them that's designed low, and they got a narrow shaft that's sitting on top of the cylinder. They made the whole bullet fit inside the cylinder. So therefore, the bullet went from being a 375 38 down to a 357 to fit inside the brass. So here's the funny thing of history. The 36 cap and ball is actually a 38, 380. The 38 and the 357 is actually a 36, but it calls itself a 38. So the 38 was called a 36, and it became a 36 that calls itself a 38. One of them funny things in history. The 44 is easier of the two to do the conversions, but stick with the smaller, lighter bullets. Now, can you put a Johnson & Dow or a Kerr bullet into 45 brass and shoot it in it? Yes, it can be done. Might be a little fiddly, you got to work out details. But yeah, you can. You'd still want to shoot black powder or work it out to a proper equivalent for those that hand load. So, to recap for this episode of the Percussion Revolvers, what we're dealing with here is proper size. And what do I recommend? If you've got a 44 and you wish to do it as a cartridge conversion down the line, those are very available and very easy to do. You want a round ball mold that is 451, and down the line, if you're going to get a lot of guns over time, you may want to get a 454 mold and change them out and figure out which one. If you only want to do it once and buy one and be done with it, order a box of 451 round ball and a box of 454 round ball from Hornady or something like that, and try them in your gun. And whichever one works best, order a mold that size. Okay? For the conicals, I recommend the Kerr bullet as an all-around conical to do good. The Johnson Dow is also a good choice. In the 36, I do not recommend getting a drop-in conversion to shoot 38 special, unless you're going to hand load with hollow base bullets, because all you're doing is the bullets just rattling down the barrel. It's automatically too small. Okay? A lot of times they don't mention that to you. So, I like a 375 round ball or a 380, depending on the bore. Start with 375, and for the conical, either go with the Lee conical or go with the Colt conical. Either one of them will work well. I hope this brings some depth and some clarity to you in your cap and ball. I don't want you to waste time and money buying molds that aren't going to be useful or cause things to be difficult, like my Spiller and Burr that shooting the Richmond 390 is just forget it. I'm scared I'm going to bend the loading lever because it's just so hard, because it's so small diameter. On the other hand, if I've got a old wore out gun, it may shoot really, really well. So, LeePrecision.com is where to go look for round ball molds. You can also quite often find them still brand new on eBay or Amazon. Okay, and they do carry conicals as well. So that will handle your round ball and etc. Lee production pots to make bullets, same thing, that's what I use. And there's tons of videos out there, and earlier in this series I did a series about how to cast bullets, so you can go back and find that. Hope this answers your questions. I hope this brought a little bit of knowledge to you, and I hope it increases your shooting and enjoyment of your cap and ball revolvers. Till next time, guys, I'm Blackie, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.